By the late 1930s, the German Army already understood that the classic division between rifles, for long-range fire, and submachine guns, for close combat, left a gap in between. Mobile assault groups and fighting in built-up areas required a weapon that would be compact, capable of automatic fire, and at the same time retain the accuracy and range of a rifle at medium distances. The experience of battles in Poland and especially in France, 1940, showed that existing SMGs were ineffective beyond 100 to 150 meters, while rifles were heavy and slow for dynamic assaults. 1941 to 1942, concept and experiments. Military engineers and designers set a course for creating an intermediate cartridge and a corresponding automatic system. Several design bureaus worked in parallel. C.G. Haenel, Irma, and Walter ran competing programs. By 1942, the first carbine prototypes with a shortened rifle cartridge had been tested. The idea was to reduce recoil impulse while preserving ballistics sufficient for firing at 300 to 400 meters. 1942, birth of the 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kurz cartridge, a shortened rifle cartridge designated 7.92 by 33 millimeters. Kurz short was developed. It became the technical foundation for a new class of weapons. While inferior in energy to a full-power rifle round, the Kurz offered significantly greater energy and range than ordinary pistol cartridges. This made it possible to create a weapon with controllable automatic fire and acceptable recoil. 1942 to 1943, prototypes MKB-42, MP-43. Based on the new cartridges, Haenel, under the leadership of designers including Hugo Schmeisser, created MKB, Maschinenkarabiner models. Various versions were tested on the range and in the field. By late 1942, early 1943, some units received trial batches. In documents of the time, the abbreviation MKB-42H appears. H stood for Haenel. During refinement, the weapon acquired a characteristic elongated receiver, stamped components, and a convenient layout for automatic fire. 1943, first combat trials and frontline reaction. Experimental models were used in combat, on the Eastern Front, and in local operations. Commanders noted that the new rifle gave soldiers an advantage at medium distances, turning an assault into a faster and more flexible operation. Mass production, however, was not yet in place. Supply was limited to small batches. 1944, official adoption and new name, STG-44. In 1944, the weapon was officially adopted as the Sturmgewehr 44, assault rifle, abbreviated STG-44. The name reflected not only technical characteristics, but also a new tactical concept. Assault groups armed with such a weapon could deliver automatic fire at ranges previously available only to rifles, shifting the tactical balance. 1944 to 1945. Production and combat use under strain. Production took place amid acute resource shortages, bombings, and industrial destruction. The STG-44 was used in battles in the East and Western Europe. In a number of units, it became a highly desired tool. However, production scale and logistics did not allow it to become a mass factor capable of changing the outcome of the war. Even so, individual operations, assaults, and defensive fights demonstrated its real advantages. Increased volume of fire at 200 to 400 meters, convenience at close and medium range, and good controllability. In bursts, The STG-44 was a selective fire, single and automatic carbine chambered for an intermediate cartridge. The design combined stamped and cast parts, which simplified production compared to mass pre-war rifles. Its layout, sights, and weight ensured effective fire as a universal weapon for an assault group rifleman. Post-war legacy and influence. After the war, the concept of the intermediate cartridge in the assault rifle had a profound impact on the development of small arms. Many designers and military experts recognize the St. G44 as the forerunner of modern assault rifles. The idea of combining automatic firepower with rifle-like range was realized in post-war designs around the world, from the Soviet AK-47 to Western developments. The STG-44 went down in history as a technological and conceptual breakthrough, not an absolute game changer in the course of the war, but a key stage in the evolution of infantry small arms. The St. G44 is an example of how tactical need and technical ingenuity led to the creation of a fundamentally new class of weapon. Its story is a series of logical steps: a battlefield-identified problem, a technical idea, the intermediate cartridge, prototypes and trials, adoption and combat use, long-term influence. Despite limited production and its late appearance, the historical significance of this weapon is hard to overestimate. It laid the foundations for what we now consider the norm in small arms. The core technical idea behind the STG-44 was a conscious rejection of the rifle or submachine gun dogma and a shift to a weapon concept tailored to the most typical combat distances of World War II. At the outset, military manuals and designers oriented themselves toward rifle ballistics and shooting at ranges of hundreds of meters and beyond. But real war showed that the vast majority of firefights and assaults took place at distances up to 400 meters, with the sweet spot around 100 to 300 meters. In these conditions, full rifle cartridge energy became excessive, making weapons bulky, with heavy recoil and difficult to control in automatic fire. Pistol rounds, by contrast, were insufficiently effective at the ranges where many operational tasks were decided. The answer was the idea of an intermediate cartridge, a compromise between rifle power and the controllability of a pistol cartridge system. The 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz intermediate cartridge embodied this idea. A shortened rifle case with an appropriate powder charge yielded bullet velocity and energy lower than the standard 7.92 by 57 mm rifle round, but markedly higher than pistol cartridges. Ballistically, this meant a flatter, short to medium range trajectory and reduced recoil impulse while retaining sufficient lethality to engage targets at 200 to 400 meters. Exactly what was needed in practice. For the shooter, this meant that, with a compact weapon length and moderate weight, he could fire controllable bursts without losing the critical reserve of range and effectiveness for aiming. Thus, the cartridge itself imposed new engineering requirements on the operating system. A bolt and gas system sized for a mid-level impulse, a locking method, and inertial parameters ensuring a reliable cycle under varied fouling and temperature conditions at the front. The St. G44's operating mechanism was adapted to these requirements. Reduced recoil compared to a full-power rifle round allowed the use of gas-operated mechanisms and moving part masses, which together produce controllable burst dispersion. The operating system was designed for reliability and simplicity, Avoid excessive precision and tight tolerances where unjustified, yet keep functionality in harsh field conditions. This took shape in specific solutions: a gas system with a fairly robust setting, a straightforward bolt group, and a return spring tuned for predictable behavior in both bursts and semi-auto. Designers assumed the weapon would be used by soldiers with varied training, often in dirt, dust, and cold, so resistance to fouling and ease of disassembly for cleaning were critical. The St. G44's layout combined elements of the traditional rifle and the submachine gun, but in a new, pragmatic guise. The stock provided proper shoulder length for aiming, the pistol grip improved control during bursts, and the mass balance was arranged to minimize muzzle climb in automatic fire. A roughly 30-round magazine became standard, providing good fire density and reducing the frequency of reloads at critical moments of an assault. The sights were oriented not to rifle distances of 800 to 1,000 meters, but precisely to the working band of 100 to 400 meters. Graduations and windage were set for rapid target acquisition and the use of automatic fire upon detecting targets at medium range. Production decisions were no less important than ballistics and mechanics. World War II demanded weapons that not only shot well, but could be produced quickly, in large series, under shortages of metals, skilled labor, and amid bombings of industrial bases. One key engineering task, therefore, was to reduce the design to a set of parts suitable for mass stamping and simple mechanical servicing. The St. G44 used a wide array of stamped components, simplified metal structures, and parts that could be made with fewer turning operations and precision fitting. This reduced cost, sped assembly, and lowered the need for highly skilled machinists, vital when human resources were limited. The interaction of all these elements, cartridge, operating system, layout, and production, defined the St. G44's practical essence and effectiveness. The lower energy cartridge, together with a properly tuned action, yielded controllable bursts. Burst centers stayed within bounds that allowed engaging personnel and suppressing firing points, even with automatic fire at medium ranges. Compactness and balance let the shooter fire from cover during bayonet rushes and in urban terrain without major loss of accuracy. Production simplicity enabled output on a scale comparable to the needs of individual divisions, though not in quantities that could fundamentally alter the war's outcome due to the broader constraints of Germany's late-war economy. The critical side of engineering compromise matters as well. Effective at medium distances, the intermediate cartridge logically lost out at long range. On battlefields where shots at 500 to 800 meters were sometimes required, the STG-44 could not replace a rifle with higher energy and better ballistics. The very stamped parts that were radically practical for production sometimes reduced durability and the precision of individual components, increasing variability between batches. Moreover, the novelty of the concept meant logistics and tactics lagged behind the technical possibilities. Having only a few such rifles in a unit reduced the effect of their introduction, since mixed armament interaction demands careful tactical coordination and training. Another key aspect is the human factor. However well engineered, a weapon must be easy to handle and intuitive in combat. The STG-44's layout emphasized simple fire control, an intuitive selector, a grip and balance that suited most shooters, and a reload process polished enough not to slow actions in critical moments. This lowered the skill threshold needed to use the rifle effectively, making the St. G44 especially useful in units that, by war's end, were often staffed quickly and not always with fully trained recruits. Finally, the STG-44's technical essence is not just a set of engineering choices and figures, but a systemic approach to the problem. Changing the key parameter, the cartridge, forced a rethinking of all other components: operating system, materials, manufacturing methods, and tactics. This systemic shift led to the St. G44 becoming the prototype and conceptual progenitor of the next generation of assault rifles. It was in the combination of these factors, cartridge policy, automatic scheme, ergonomics, and production decisions, that the weapon's historical meaning emerged. Not just a new tool, but a new model of armament suited to the realities of modern maneuver warfare. In conclusion, the technical essence of the STG-44 was not a magic recipe that instantly solved all armament problems, but a sequence of engineering compromises dictated by practical necessity. The STG-44 proved the viability of the intermediate cartridge concept and confirmed that a reasonable combination of ballistics and mechanics can yield a universal weapon suited to a wide range of combat tasks. Its construction became a template and a lesson for later generations: how to design weapons considering not only bullet ballistics, but also the human factor, production constraints, and the tactical realities of the battlefield. The idea of the Maschinenkarabiner arose after the early campaigns of World War II. The Wehrmacht clearly realized that modern combat was increasingly unfolding at 100 to 400 meters, where neither rifles nor submachine guns were optimal. A need emerged for a weapon that combined compactness and controllable automatic fire with range and striking power close to a rifle's. In 1941 to 1942, several firms, Haenel and Walter in particular, worked on this task, and competition yielded two branches: the MKB-42H by Haenel, under designers such as Hugo Schmeisser, and the MKB-42W by Walter. The former featured a gas-operated system, extensive use of stamped parts, and an emphasis on simplicity and reliability. It initially offered only full auto and was shipped in limited batches to the Eastern Front in 1942 for field trials. Walther's variant proved technically more complex and, under frontline conditions, inferior to Haenel's due to poorer maintainability and harder production. By 1942 to 1943, it became clear the project needed to be brought to a production-ready model, but the political and industrial situation required disguising the innovation. To avoid pushback from high command, the development was framed as a continuation of the SMG line and designated MP-43. This name change came with real technical updates. Semi-auto mode was added, the gas system and bolt were revised for greater reliability, ergonomics improved with a pistol grip and stock, the 30-round magazine was standardized, and the use of stamping was expanded to simplify production. The first MP-43 batches in 1943 performed well in combat. Soldiers noted controllable bursts, versatile employment, and increased firepower at medium range. Further refinement led to the MP-44, technically a more polished MP-43 with improved manufacturing and enhanced reliability, thanks to tweaks in gas and bolt group components. In late 1944, the weapon was officially renamed Sturmgewehr 44 The new name reflected not only the weapon's concept, but the tactical idea of assault, using the automatic rifle as the primary tool of assault actions. The STG-44 incorporated all prior prototype advances. It fired the 7.92 by 33 Kurz intermediate cartridge, had selective fire, semi-auto, a 30-round magazine, and a gas-operated locked breech system designed for operation in dirt-of-field conditions. The evolution from MKB-42H through MP-43 and MP-44 to the STG-44 shows a typical path of engineering iteration. The first step proved the principle. Moved to an intermediate cartridge and suitable automation, then came practical improvements aimed at reliability, battlefield usability, and mass production feasibility. Haenel's simple, manufacturable design aligned better with Army requirements, while Walther's more complex solutions lost out in competition. The MP series became the compromise between experiment and mass production. The STG-44 emerged as the serial product of the new class, which, although it did not alter the war's outcome due to limited numbers and logistical issues, paved the way to the modern assault rifle concept. In the end, development advanced not by a sudden leap, but through a chain of practical compromises and refinements. And in just a few years, the distance was covered from an experimental machine carbine to the acknowledged predecessor of an entire family of post-war small arms. The key figure in the STG-44's creation was Hugo Schmeisser, often called the father of the assault rifle. He led work on the prototypes at C.G. Haenel and played a decisive role in bringing the MKB-42H to the serial MP-43/MP-44, and ultimately the STG-44. His experience with automatic and semi-automatic designs allowed a rapid transition from the intermediate cartridge concept to a truly workable system. Manufacturing enterprises played an equally important role. The main developer and largest maker was C.G. Haenel of Suhl, where crucial R&D and much of the assembly took place. Walther also competed. Its MKB-42W was tested, but lost out to Haenel's solution in simplicity and manufacturability. After refinement, several major plants joined production. J.P. Sauer and Sohn, also in Suhl, facilities in Erfurt, Tau, Erma, and the Austrian Steyr-Daimler-Puch. Together they provided the main capacity for MP-43/MP-44/St. G, 44 output in 1943 to 1945. We should not forget the military engineers and Wehrmacht test teams, whose combat trials in the East quickly revealed the prototype's practical advantages and pushed it toward refinement and partial adoption. Administrative and political figures, from command level to the very top, influenced the project's fate, including the renaming of MP-44 to Sturmgewehr 44 and questions of scaling production in a war economy. In sum, it was a team effort. The designer's talent, led by Schmeisser, the industrial base of Haenel/Sauer/Erfurt/Steyr, and frontline trials together made possible the emergence of the world's first serial assault weapon. Although the St. G-44 was a technological breakthrough in idea and concept, in practice it faced a set of limitations and problems that significantly reduced its tactical and strategic impact. First, late entry into service. Mass production and deliveries began only in 1944, when Germany's war economy was already suffering resource shortages, factory destruction, and constant bombing. As a result, the number of units produced remained relatively small and was distributed piecemeal. Some platoons and companies received the STG-44, while neighboring units stayed with the Kar 98K MP-40 or other weapons. Such a patchwork armament mix reduced the overall effect. Realizing the new system's advantages would have required a massive, synchronous rearmament that was no longer possible. Second, ammunition logistics. The STG-44 used the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurtz intermediate cartridge, while the supply system was still oriented toward classic 7.92 by 57 and others. Introducing a new cartridge required retraining quartermasters, creating a separate supply line, stocks, and transport for Kurtz. In a depleted economy with disrupted communications, this was difficult. Divisions received insufficient or scattered ammunition lots, which limited sustained STG-44 use over time. Third, variable manufacturing quality. To cut costs and speed output, designers used extensive stamping and simplified parts. This brought a bold gain in production speed, but reduced consistency between batches and increased variability in the reliability of particular components. Under combat stress, dirt, low temperatures, minimal maintenance, some specimens required more frequent service and adjustment than impeccably machined pre-war rifles. For the average rifleman, this meant you could not always count on identical performance from batch to batch. Fourth, weight and balance. Although more manageable and shorter than a classic rifle, the STG-44 was still relatively heavy, roughly 4.5 to 5 kilograms in full combat trim, noticeable during long march and fight cycles. In cover and fire and assaults, this was not always critical, but for maneuver operations and foot movement over rough terrain, the weight and its distribution affected soldier fatigue. Ergonomically, the stock and grip were well thought out, but not all shooters immediately adapted to the new burst fire style. Training was needed to form the skill of controlled bursts at medium range. Fifth, maintenance and training. The new concept of fire and tactics demanded changes in training. Troops and leaders had to relearn. Use automatic bursts at medium range, coordinate fire teams, alter interaction tactics with riflemen, snipers, and support. Late in the war, when personnel were replenished quickly and often without proper training, time and resources for instruction were limited. Many units therefore failed to exploit the St. G-44's potential advantages fully. Sixth, susceptibility to wear and spare parts logistics. The prevalence of stamped parts eased production but complicated repairs away from factories. Serious damage called for part replacements, not always available in field workshops. Industrial destruction and depleted stocks further slowed replacement or upgrades. Seventh, political administrative barriers. The project was initially hidden under the MP label, and adoption faced resistance and bureaucratic delays. Political factors slowed acceptance and production scaling, and curtailed the introduction of necessary training and distribution programs. Finally, the strategic limitation, scale and timing alone made a broad effect impossible. Even an ideal weapon introduced late and in insufficient numbers cannot fundamentally change the war's overall picture. The STG-44 demonstrated conceptual superiority, but realizing this idea on a strategic scale was undermined by the sum of production, logistics, training, and political problems. Taken together, the picture is clear. Technically and conceptually, the STG-44 was right, but operational practice exposed a wide spectrum of constraints. Late introduction, ammunition logistics difficulties, batch variability from mass stamping, training, and repair demands, and political industrial barriers. All these factors together reduced the real effectiveness of the innovation, leaving it mainly an important historical and technological turning point, rather than a decisive factor in the conflict's outcome. The STG-44 began appearing at the front with combat trials in 1943 to 1944, and it was in the field that its strengths and weaknesses became obvious. The earliest notable episodes are linked to the Eastern Front, where urban terrain, forests, and frequent mid-range firefights provided an ideal stage for the intermediate cartridge's advantages. Soldiers receiving trial batches of MKB/MP43 soon noted the new carbine significantly eased the work of assault groups. One could fire short, automatic bursts at 150 to 300 meters, while maintaining acceptable dispersion. Command reports mentioned that in street fighting or assaults on fortified points, a squad with even a few STGs could deliver denser fire and cover flanks more effectively than a squad equipped only with PPSHS or rifles. This did not mean instant superiority. There were few weapons, and skillful use required coordination, but at the tactical level, the effect was felt. Another notable context of use was defensive battles and local counterattacks in Western Europe in 1944 to 1945. Here, the STG-44 was employed both in positional fighting and mobile ambushes. Its strengths at close to medium range allowed garrisons to engage advancing groups more effectively, especially in mixed urban and broken terrain. In specific actions, soldiers noted that short, controlled bursts allowed them to suppress firing points while avoiding excessive ammunition expenditure vital under limited supplies. There were also more concrete episodes that fed the weapon's frontline reputation. In break-ins and street fighting, the STG-44 often proved decisive in the hands of junior leaders. Sergeants and squad leaders who quickly mastered the short burst plus aimed semi-auto technique could build local advantage. In diaries and post-war memoirs are descriptions where riflemen with STGs covered assault teams entering buildings, stitching doorways with bursts, and creating fire curtains at medium range, tasks previously requiring a separate support element with rifles and SMGs. Despite praise, frontline feedback was cautious. Soldiers noted controllability and convenience, but pointed to issues: the weapon's mass and the relative heft of a full magazine, stamped parts wearing under intensive use, and a unit's dependence on the proper ammunition. Commanders reported that the STG's effectiveness rises when several are present in a squad, acting together and covering each other. But if only one soldier has an STG, the effect is local and not always sustainable. Thus, despite enthusiastic remarks from some participants, overall feedback was pragmatic. An excellent weapon when used correctly and when logistics support it, but not a magic bullet that decides battles on its own. Loss and capture of enemy samples added an interesting twist to the St. G-44's reputation. Soviet and Western troops encountering it noted the unusual combination at the time of compactness and range. Captured samples were often sent for study. They were compared with local SMGs and rifles, and the conclusions were unambiguous. The new intermediate cartridge concept made practical sense and posed a threat in enemy hands. Post-war reports and analyses frequently mention that studying the German experience spurred Soviet and Western designers to rethink the role of the single assault rifle in the infantry platoon. No less important was the human dimension of perception. Many frontline soldiers who received the St. G44 wrote that it gave them confidence, to quickly increase fire density without leaving the sight's reduced psychological stress during assaults. Alongside this, however, were complaints about logistics. Shortages of Kurtz ammunition in some operations meant the STG was used sparingly as a first-strike weapon, rather than continuously. Field repair difficulties were also cited. Some assemblies and stamped parts required factory attention after serious failures, which limited the weapon's survivability in prolonged campaigns. There are also legendary stories that circulated among soldiers. For example, accounts of teams using the St. G44 to maintain all-around defense in dense urban areas, or to carve out resistance nodes quickly in forests. Even if embellished by front-line lore, these episodes reflect the weapon's true functional niche between submachine guns and rifles, where fire density and controllability decide the outcome of short, intense engagements. The bottom line from the front is this: the STG-44 earned a reputation as a weapon that changes tactics at the squad and platoon level, but could not replace systemic factors: training, logistics, mass supply. Its use produced many examples of successful actions and individual feats, but overall, effectiveness was constrained by support issues and late introduction. In the post-war light, frontline memories and analyses confirmed that practical experience with the St. G44 became one of the strongest arguments for the worldwide adoption of the assault rifle concept. The STG-44 entered history as a weapon that appeared too late to change the course of World War II, yet early enough to change the approach to small arms forever. Its historical significance lies not in how many rifles were produced or which battles they fought, but in the fact that the assault rifle concept was first embodied in metal and tested in real combat. The Germans were the first to bring to maturity the idea of an intermediate cartridge and a universal automatic weapon for the infantryman, thus paving the way for all subsequent models that defined infantry tactics in the second half of the 20th century. In the short term, the St. G44's contribution was limited. By the time it appeared, Germany was already on the defensive, the economy was suffering from bombings, and logistics barely coped with supplying existing weapons and ammunition. There was no mass rearmament. By war's end, only a few 100,000 STG-44s had reached the front, a drop in the bucket compared to the millions of rifles and SMGs in circulation. Hence, its practical impact manifested as improving the combat capability of individual units and creating pockets of local superiority, not in a strategic turning point. In the long term, however, the St. G44's significance is hard to overstate. It became the prototype of an entire class of weapons now perceived as standard: the automatic rifle chambered for an intermediate cartridge. This concept underpinned the Soviet AK-47, the American AR-15/M16, the Belgian FNFAL, and many others. Every modern army is essentially armed with the St. G44's heirs, albeit with different layouts and technologies. The very fact that after the war, virtually all major powers began developing their own assault rifles shows how revolutionary the idea was. Another aspect of its historical importance is the change in combat tactics. A weapon enabling controllable automatic fire at medium ranges altered the composition of the infantry squad. If previously it split into riflemen and machine gunners with support, now each soldier could perform both roles at a basic level. This increased the autonomy of small units and made combat more dynamic. Thus, the St. G44 was not only a technological, but also a tactical innovation. One can say the weapon had two faces. To contemporaries it was handy but late, while to historians it is the founder of an entire era. Its real-world use was limited by supply, training, and production issues, but the idea embodied in it outlived the war and shaped small arms development for decades. In conclusion, the main takeaway is this. The STG-44 was not a miracle weapon that could have saved the Reich, but rather a symbol of a technological leap at a time when Germany could no longer capitalize on it. Nevertheless, it proved that the infantrymen of the future should be armed with a universal automatic weapon chambered for an intermediate cartridge. That is its true historical significance. Not a war-deciding factor, but a turning point in the evolution of small arms.